My dear friends, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tonis Tatar. He will present his paper, May the Future of Aesthetics Here in Neuroscience. So, the stage is yours.
Yes, thank you. And I am very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me and my colleague Tartu. First of all, I must say that the subject I will talk about is also quite new to me, so I have started to read into it quite recently. Therefore, I will mostly outline the subject, and I hope that my presentation will at least provoke some thoughts. So, I will start with a thought that my own professor taught me once, and that I like to tell my students of art theory. And the thought is very simple, and it goes like this. There is no art theory that can explain all or every kind of art, but each theory of art can explain at least some kind of art. So this is something that I would also like to keep in mind concerning neuroaesthetics, or the subject of my presentation. So the contemporary art world, in my opinion, is dominated by a certain ambiguous mix of theories of art, and it has as one of its pillars the ideas first expressed in the 60s by Tanto and George Tika. And as you, of course, probably know, Tanto claimed that the reason some objects are considered to be works of art is not related to any special qualities of these objects. Instead, the reason lies in a theoretical context surrounding these objects. And Tanto used the so-called visually indistinguishable pairs argument to support his theory. And according to this argument, the only way to distinguish, for example, between Andy Warhol's pillow boxes and boxes of real washing powder is that the works by Warhol are perceived in the context of art world interpretations. Now, this claim was brought forward as an answer to the 20th century avant-garde's most significantly the ready-made. And the institutional theory of art was indeed a good explanation to the question why an upside-down urinal can be considered art, for example. The problem, of course, is that not all kind of art is represented by the work by Marcel Duchamp. To give you an example, I wrote my PhD thesis, which I defended 2 summers ago, on 3 Estonian artists from the Soviet period who all made a remarkable turn in their work from the avant-garde to more traditional means of art. With his argument, Tanto postulates a philosophical paradigm of thinking about art. And by doing so, he implicitly imposes a theory that applies primarily to ready-made and conceptual art, in my opinion. Meanwhile, when we take into examination the entire body of artworks ever produced, for example, also this I studied in my thesis, it becomes evident that most of the art does not present this dilemma of indistinguishable pairs, because indeed it is possible to imagine an indistinguishable copy of any traditional work of art, and such things have been long known, and they are called forgeries. Therefore, to say that it is just a theoretical and institutional context that makes a traditional work of art art is is factually correct, but still an utterly unsatisfactory explanation of such works, in my opinion. Another major pillar of current art theory is derived from social sciences, and to put it most simply, it is either explicit or implicit the expectation that a work of art, in order to be effective, needs to have a social impact. Of course, this also is an approach that is quite ideological, meaning that it does not only explain art, but also prescribes what art should do. And again, there are plenty of artworks, especially from the traditional and aesthetic current, that do not support interpretations that concentrate heavily on social or political relevance. All good art changes its viewer and therefore also society, but political change is not the essence of art, in my opinion. Therefore, to end my introduction, I shall claim that there indeed exists a need in aesthetics and theory of art for an alternative theories of art that would also enable to better interpret and value works of art from the aspect of aesthetic experience. And by this I mean their emotional, affective impact as opposed to value endowed by some social theory. So in my opinion, the sociology of art needs to be complemented by psychology of art and perhaps even biology of art. While it is indeed due to social processes that we deem some objects to be works of art, the creation as well as reception of art depends on individual and more precisely on the neuronal processes. Art is perceived and expressed through the brain and therefore obeys the laws of the brain. Therefore, the brain seems like a reasonable place to look for an understanding of aesthetics and of the arts. In the last 2 decades, a branch of aesthetics called neuroaesthetics has emerged, and according to its leading researcher, Professor Semir Seki, neuroaesthetics is the scientific study of the neural basis for the contemplation and creation of a work of art. This surge of neuroaesthetics owes much to technological innovations such as EEG, electroencephalography, functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and positron emission tomography, PET. And these devices have allowed us to see the living brain as people make, look, and even imagine art. Another common method used is observing patients with brain injuries and neurodegenerative diseases that have led to limitations and changes in their artistic style. To give an example, it has been ascertained that lesions in the right hemisphere of the brain cause changes in the spatial arrangement of works of art, while damages to the orbitofrontal and left hemisphere that are the regions responsible for rational processes can actually enhance the emergence of artistic capabilities. Neuroaesthetics is also quite closely tied with evolutionary psychology, with the same very simple reason that the brain is probably a product of evolution. This point of view ties aesthetic rewards to evolution evolutionary essentials such as food, safety, sex, and the like. And the emergence of beauty, or sense of beauty and art has been specifically linked to the development of the frontal lobes of the brain that may have taken place as recently as 40,000 years ago. Now I will look into which kind of new understanding of art neuroaesthetics can possibly offer. And to start off with, I will argue that neuroaesthetics can offer fresh answers to the very fundamental questions of aesthetics. And by this I mean nothing less than questions such as what is the function of art in human life and what good can art do for us as individuals and as a society. Of course, these questions are all but new, but neuroaesthetics has the benefit of vesting its answers with experimentally sound knowledge. To give an example, the much discussed problem of aesthetics has been that of the borders of aesthetic experience or borders of art. A usual approach when studying art through its impact on the brain involves cerebral localization of different cognitive aspects. Localizing certain aspects of aesthetic experience in the architecture of the brain can be quite telling, and this has to do with a peculiarity of the brain, namely that it often shares its structural entities among more than one function. To give an example, the experience of beauty has been localized in a part of the emotional brain known as orbitofrontal cortex of the frontal lobes. The same part that is active when humans experience beauty has also been found active when experiencing reward and pleasure. And this has raised a very interesting problem. What, if any, is the difference in brain activity that correlates with the experience of different kinds of hedonic experience? And Professor Semir Seki has indeed shown that visual beauty is correlated with the very same region as musical, mathematical, and moral beauty. It has been claimed that people take pleasure from comparisons, and aesthetics emerges at the point of contact between powerfully moving rewards. Therefore, to return to the question of the borders of aesthetic experience, it has been claimed by Gabriel Starr that this dynamic nature of sensory rewards implicates an inherent potential for growth and expansion in arts. Another fundamental question I already mentioned is the function of art, and neuroaesthetics also tackles that. Why do we need art and what good does it do? In one study, different works of art were shown to respondents who were asked to assess them. It was shown that when viewers found an artwork to be extremely moving, an interlinked set of brain regions responsible for self-assessment, forward planning, autobiographical memory, and ideas of self was engaged. And this result, it would seem, supports psychological and existential or humanist theories of art that connect art with a deeper understanding of who we are as people. Another area of many neuroaesthetic researches has been the functional specialization of the visual cortex of the brain. It has been discovered that different areas of the visual cortex are specialized to different attributes of the visual scene. Individual cells of the visual brain are selected for the kind of visual stimulus we respond to. A cell might, for example, be selected for a certain color or lines of specific orientation or motion in a specific direction. This finding has led neuroaestheticians to speculate on a relationship between these cells of the visual cortex and different kinds of modern art. To give some examples, the paintings of Mondrian have been claimed to activate the part of the visual cortex known as V1 that reacts to horizontal and vertical lines. Or Fauvist art with its unnatural colors has been claimed to activate an area of the visual brain known as V4 that is devoted to colors. Or kinetic art, it's been claimed was unconsciously created in order to satisfy the needs of an area of the visual cortex known as V5 that is specialized on motion. Neuroaesthetic theories that link specific areas of the brain to specific art forms go beyond the visual brain. These theories cover the whole brain. To give another example, it has been claimed that the portrait painting owes at least part of its traditional popularity to the fact that there is a whole cortical region devoted to faces and facial recognition. And this part of the brain, called fusiform gyrus, is reportedly critical to the aesthetic effects produced by portraits. Another interesting experiment ascertained that abstract compositions activate a smaller part of the brain than representational or figurative compositions. So when viewing abstract art, brain activity is confined to relatively limited areas of the visual cortex, while looking at representational art, additional areas become active. Semir-Seki's larger claim is that artists or painters are all unconscious neuroscientists who use artistic means to experiment with brain. And his perhaps most graphic argument concerns cubism. According to him, the essence of cubism was to mimic what the brain does when it unites different points of view. Notably, or quite surprisingly, Seki reaches a conclusion that the attempt by cubism to mimic what the brain does was in the neurobiological sense of failure, and he grounds it on the fact that often the objects depicted on cubist compositions are not recognizable or not easily recognizable. And whether Seki's account of cubism is justified remains debatable, but one has to admire his courage to make such a categorical judgment. And to say that cubism was a failure is something that a respectable mainstream art historian or theoretician would probably not dare to make, and I find it quite refreshing. Another perspective area of neuronal research concerns the discovery of the so-called mirror neurons. It has been claimed that with these mirror neurons we have identified the neurological basis of empathy, and also attempts have been made to explore the relationship between mirror neurons and culture. Friedberg and Galisi have argued that with the help of mirror neurons, the viewer reconstructs the actions of an artist in his mind by merely observing the marks, such as brush strokes left by artists. And we call this reconstruction process in the viewer's mind an embodied simulation mechanism that animates works of art in the observer's brain. In other words, to have an aesthetic experience may need to be bodily seized by art through simulation. And this I find is rather a convincing explanation to the aesthetic effects of expressionist and gestural or action painting, for instance. And coincidentally, it is not far from the explanation given by Harold Rosenberg to abstract expressionism. This mentioned unconventional spirit of neuroaesthetics also involves taking up subjects that have been long banned from theoretical discourse, such as beauty. Beauty has made a sort of a theoretical revival in neuroaesthetics. And of course, the late 20th century politically inclined art theory has dismissed beauty as a cultural construct. Now, scientists, psychologists, and neuroaestheticians have ascertained that responses to physical beauty are automatic and irresistible. They start early in childhood and run deep. Therefore, writes Nancy Edcock, for example, it is the idea that beauty is unimportant or a cultural construct that is the real beauty myth. And these kind of thoughts have also caused some upset from the traditional side of aesthetics. Most notably, the philosopher John Hyman has dismissed neuroaesthetics as a Baywatch theory of art. Indeed, there appears to be a significant rift between the humanities and the theories involved with the input from neurobiology. Interestingly, this has brought on two different kinds of critique that seem to be mutually incompatible. From the one hand, neuroaesthetics has been dismissed as reactionary and conservative, and from the other hand, it has been accused of banalizing the miracle of art. To conclude my presentation, I see these traumatic reactions as a symptom of the current state of art theory that I shortly outlined in the beginning of my presentation. When theories petrify into ideologies, the cultural space becomes heavy with dogmas, and this is when the paradigm is ripe and ready to be shifted. Therefore, I do indeed regard neuroaesthetics as a branch of aesthetics for the future. For art historians, I see a very big challenge here and the possibility. Our discipline is quite ancient, but it is only for the last 20-something years that we have actually had the technical means to observe how humans really act to art, meaning how their brain reacts to it. And one could say that this development makes most of previous theories look more or less speculative. Yet I don't think that neuroscientists can give a satisfactory explanation to art without the help of art history and the humanities. Therefore, I for one am truly excited by the perspective of using neuroaesthetic studies as a means of affirming or refuting or complementing the work done in the fields of aesthetics, art theory, and art history. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tonis Tatar. And do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I actually have one question. I was curious, well, first of all, thank you for a great presentation. It was very interesting to see all this scientific knowledge and how the brain functions when we're looking at art and observing it. But I'm just curious, how wide is the scope of people? Because I'm just curious, like, for example, like synesthetic people who experience combined senses, don't they react differently? Don't their brains react differently in different regions, for example? Well, in general, my question is it actually the same for each person, or does it still depend on personal experience and personal body differences?
Well, first of all, I must say that I myself am not a neuroscientist, but or a biologist, but well, so I'm not much more wiser in this respect than most of us. But I would say probably yes, probably this is one of the objections to neuroaesthetics, that it looks at humans as just another species of animals, and it doesn't really cover the individual differences. Yes, but obviously, I guess our brains are different. Yes, and it's a good question. I'm not sure how much neuroaesthetics takes this individual differences in consideration.
May I comment? Because I mean, certainly individual differences, they are there, but in this imaging studies, typically people take a big group of people and then look at the general trends, and they don't refuse the possibility that there are individual differences. It's just like main things that what you're citing about, what say we take for example.
Thank you for this fascinating presentation. I suppose I guess to continue on this, don't you think that art has a different epistemological status as science? You know, when who cares that Cubism is a failure in scientific terms? What's wrong with that?
Yes, but that's true. But I think that in the current state of affairs in art history, art theory, as I said, some dogmas. But me personally, I also think that Cubism is the most boring era of style that Picasso used. But not many. It's not. I find what's wrong with saying finding or expressing such unconventional views, and also giving some kind of explanation.
Yeah, I think there could be different opinions concerning Tyler or Buddhism, of course. Yeah. Any questions or comments?
Yes, as I said, it's only one way of looking at art. It doesn't need to be the only one.
I just wanted to comment, maybe we will connect with art piece. I still believe that we are not just a piece of flesh, and our brain is just one part of big complexes. And I think that we take different these things because our souls are different, and our brain is just a piece of meat, and this material part of your body, and this is just already this end part, yes, of interpretation and on how you look on things and how you look on including art. Yes, I understood. It was interesting that you spoke about material body, about brain, how it takes, but you did not mention the spiritual side of this process. That was interesting.
Yes, well, this also brings us to a theological argument about body and soul and stuff.
Yeah, that's completely agree. It's essential. Essential also pay attention to the spiritual, philosophical aspects of that. So there should be such a distant
spiritual, humanist side, point of view.
Call it how you wish, but I think that every human personality consists from two parts, from material and this person. You are a person as a spirit, yes, in your flesh, and this is what makes us different now. And perception.
Yes, but it's also the brain that makes us different.
What we see, but we cannot find we cannot make conclusions and find this sense of how our brain works if we don't try to understand how we perceive, primarily how we perceive. Yes. I have heard such a theory that even blind people, they can, with just touching with their fingertips, they can see, not see, but see in their brain difference in between colors, yes. Different textile, yes, colors, they can see difference without sight, yes. And it is not just because their brain, yes, or their sight, their eyes are seeing this object, but because there are some other these ways how we perceive life now. Or you just sure that only our important part is this piece of brain. Or
do you know the exact method how they discovered the state material? Like how they did it exactly? How did they?
Well, I mentioned different experiments, and I also brought
maybe
out.
if they take into account like something like something of some spiritual aspects. So I'm thinking a group of people that.
Well, I think this is the work for art historians or also aestheticians from the humanities, because these neuroscientists, neuroaestheticians, they often have the background of science, biology, anatomy. So it's true, but they don't too much take into account spirit and
other existing things.
yes.
So just comment that in a way, what you represented, approach you represented in a way to kind of parallel to quite a classical avant-garde approach, especially of a Russian avant-garde. For example, Malevich tried to articulate artistic research. And also, he used this term already, artistic research, художественное исследование, in terms of a positivistic way. So he tried to combine and articulate artistic research through kind of quasi-biologist terms. So something.
Yes, but I guess Malevich was also a bit mystic.
Yeah. It's quite a common thing. This close sometimes even like bit dangerous of mysticism and positivism. Those are quite common nowadays.
Well, what is the aim of your research in general? Like, where do you want to arrive? You want to just explain why different styles of art have different impacts on other people, or what is the best art ever, or what is the point?
First of all, it's not my research yet, but I guess the aim is just to discover how art works, how does it function, how different kinds of art function, and well, you can. What I see a great perspective is to compare this data from experiments to the speculations and theories made by different aestheticians, and to see whose theories are supported by this date, and perhaps these experiments can also refute some aesthetic theories.
For art has its roots, and I was thinking about John Donne, who had this kind of eternity and beauty in his poetry, and then I think about the metaphysical, point of view, which is not physical but metaphysical, and physics are very scared of metaphysics because there is at some point something the brain cannot explain.
Yes, I would say that also metaphysics are scared of physics.
I just want to add that even in the very beginning of the 20th century there were experiments when scientists, biologists just wait caught before death and after death, and the spirit weighs some 50 or how much grams when people get, when people die, then is just whose their weight to be, and it calls that this spirit also what you call just mystical or something like that.
I think it's quite discutable.
Yeah,
so maybe we have if we look only from biological point of view, then we have to just add to all this discussion that also even spirit has its weight.
We could bear our artistic position, but it's not always necessary to confuse with some kind of
maybe spirit is the main argument why we are able to feel such emotions.
Was to provoke thought, and I'm happy that I succeeded.
Yeah. I think probably spirituality is also some kind of construction. It was quite refreshing, and what we saw also during this presentation, you saw that this parts of brain that is responsible for feeling of beauty is different from this parts of brain that is responsible for our visual cortex. It's not the same place where our feeling of beauty is arising. So I think it's the first step toward understanding what the beauty is. And probably my first guess that beauty is some kind of construction of language, because the same part of frontal cortex is where our language lives. But of course we need more insight into how our brain is working. So I think we could thank you, Dr. Tonis Tatar.